What up, Cavs Nation? I'm your host, Ethan Sands, and I'm back with another episode of the Wine and Gold Talk podcast. And it's just me today. It's a solo dolo episode of the pod, and I'm coming to you guys after the Cleveland Cavaliers 130-117 victory over the San Antonio Spurs. And tonight's game was interesting because of how it began. We know this Cavs team has struggled to get off to the races and get out to a major lead to start games, and tonight was no different. The San Antonio Spurs had a plan coming in. They're not necessarily known for their pace. They're not necessarily known for their three-point shooting, but they came out on a mission. We've talked about this in the past. The Cleveland Cavaliers have this blueprint of how they can be attacked, and the transition defense was something that the San Antonio Spurs wanted to exploit, and that helped them get off to the races in the beginning of the contest with De'Aaron Fox getting downhill even without Victor Wembanyama and Stephon Castle. This was a team that was attacking the rim at will, but they also had Devin Vassell, who was phenomenal in the first half, which opened up different things for their offense. Devin Vassell in the first half alone had 7 three-pointers. He had 25 points in that first half because the Cleveland Cavaliers simply did not have an answer for him offensively, and he was simply making tough shots as well. So I don't think you can take credit away from him or solely put it on the defense. It was a little bit of a mixture of both. But the second half came around, and the Cleveland Cavaliers came out with a different level of spirit and joy that they haven't played with in a while. They were having fun with a dynamic starting unit when it came to the second half and the third quarter, starting Dean Wade in that second half rather than having Naquan Tomlin, who actually started the game, out on the floor. It was an interesting change, but a necessary one, because we've seen Dean Wade struggle slightly when it comes to the defensive end. Tonight did not have that same story. He was great defensively, sliding his feet and making sure things were difficult on anybody that he went up against, especially when it came to driving into the lanes and also just being a deflection-heavy player. I think when we talk about this Cavs defense, we would talk about the point of attack and how it's been difficult for them to keep their feet in front and while trying to funnel players to Evan Mobley or Jared Allen in the painted area. That's not necessarily what's been happening because Jared Allen or Evan Mobley are guarding players in this league today that are more so capable of being on the perimeter, and that's made things more difficult on the paint and rim protection. So having Dean Wade out there alongside Evan Mobley or alongside Thomas Bryant in some cases to start the third quarter, it was able to have multiple players who were defense heavy that were able to just stymie what the San Antonio Spurs were doing. And I want to give a big shout out to Craig Porter Jr. because he was one of the main players that was matching up with De'Aaron Fox in that second half, and he was able to slow him down to a different caliber than what he was able to accomplish in that first half. De'Aaron Fox was just 3 of 8 for 10 points in the second half alone. And in the first half, De'Aaron Fox was getting anything he wanted in the painted area. He was 6 of 11 for 15 points. So you saw a drastic difference of what the Cavs were doing and how they were guarding him. And a lot of that became because of how Craig Porter Jr. was able to utilize his body, his strength, his speed, his agility to stay in front of one of the quickest players in the NBA in De'Aaron Fox. And I think that's a testament to the work that Craig Porter Jr. has put in to get to where he is, especially when we talk about the summer regimen of what they did. But the other person that was alongside him in Cleveland, stayed in Cleveland to work on their game, was Jalen Tyson. And Jalen Tyson, once again in the starting lineup with players being sidelined, was a huge aspect of what this Cavs team was able to accomplish tonight. In that third quarter alone, Jalen Tyson had 16 of his 24 points in the third quarter, and the Cavs actually scored 44 and held the San Antonio Spurs to 19 in that third quarter. That's why I'm talking about when it comes to the defensive end of the floor, holding a team under 20 points in a period is huge. And it got to a point where the Cavs were actually playing a lineup, a second unit lineup, with Jalen Tyson being the lone starter on the floor and having other players around him, Dean Wade, Craig Porter Jr., Lonzo Ball, I believe, was in this lineup as well in the third quarter alongside Thomas Bryant. And this unit was surprisingly fantastic. They actually helped the Cavs get out to a big lead, and Jalen Tyson was leading this group, both offensively and defensively. And obviously we know with this Cavs team still wanting to have a defense-first mindset, that defense can translate into offense in a better sense than what they're doing sometimes by themselves. And also the transition offense then comes from that. And we understand that this Cavs team doesn't operate as well in the half court when Darius Garland isn't out there. And with him sidelined tonight, the Cavs utilizing a transition fast break frenzy allowed them to get out and run. And I think that scrambled the San Antonio Spurs defense and made things difficult. Obviously, in that third quarter, the Cavs had 9 fast break points to the San Antonio Spurs 0, which was a huge swing of events. And overall, the second half, the biggest thing was how the Cavs were not rebounding to their standard in the first half. In the second half, they changed that dramatically. In the first half, the San Antonio Spurs had 9 offensive rebounds, 23 total, to the Cavs' 18 total rebounds. In the second half, they had just 2 offensive rebounds and 15 total to the Cavs' 30. It made a big difference when it comes to the possession battle and when it comes to the Cavs simply getting more opportunities or preventing the San Antonio Spurs from getting multiple opportunities and looks at the basket, because we know that that can be a tiring and debilitating process if the opposition continues to get looks at the rim and also are grabbing those offensive boards to then get more looks. It's just so exhausting. And this team has dealt with so many back-to-backs, 5 games in 7 nights, which they're still a part of and are going to play again against the Warriors on Saturday. It just describes and illustrates what this Cavs team is going through. And Donovan Mitchell admitted after the game tonight that he was simply tired, washed, exhausted because of what he had been providing to this team. And even though he didn't end the game with 30 points, he had 28 points, then had his sidekick with him, Jalen Tyson, who I mentioned had 24 points. The Cavs then also added up and had 7 different players score in double figures, which is a big part of what we've been talking about this team, not necessarily only leaning on Donovan Mitchell, allowing him to pick his spots. And of course, he had 8 assists because he was able to trust in the offense around him and create for others as well, which we know is a part of his game, and his gravity can dictate that for other teams and helps himself do that as well. And I think that's a big portion of why this Cavs team was able to have success, because they weren't simply leaning on Donovan Mitchell and what he was able to do with the ball in his hands. He was able to give it up and do other things with the ball. The other thing that was huge in tonight's contest that we got to see a lot of in that third quarter that kind of just shifted the entire game coming out of halftime was the Cavs' frequency at the rim. It was one of the biggest storylines coming into tonight's contest, knowing that Victor Wembanyama wasn't going to be available, knowing that Luke Cornett was not going to be available. The Cavs had to attack the interior defense of the Spurs, which was led by Harrison Barnes and Bismack Biyombo, but also Kelly Olynyk as well. If Evan Mobley wants to be a second-team All-NBA player and an All-Star and all these things, these are the kinds of matchups that he has to dominate. But it's not just him. It's the overarching view of this entire roster and trying to get into the paint and create from there, because we know that the defense is going to swarm, collapse, and try and stop them from scoring. And the San Antonio Spurs showed that by getting a technical 3-second violation call trying to protect their paint, which I think was telling of their mindset, especially with how the Cavs have been shooting the basketball as of late. Even in tonight's contest, it wasn't great. They were 8 of 26 from the three-point line, 30.8%, which means that they weren't having the success necessary to get out there. But the biggest thing about this conversation for a team that is averaging over 40 three-point attempts per game, they didn't try and overdo it in that sense. They shot 26. That's a season low. The lowest before this was 35. So for the Cavs to take just 26, it emphasizes their point of needing to get to the basket, which they've talked about a lot throughout the season and utilizing their drives in different variations. But they actually did it tonight. And when looking at Cleaning the Glass, which is one of the sites that gives in-depth statistical analysis of the games, the Cavs were in the 100th percentile for rim frequency, 54%. And then their shooting accuracy from there was in the 66th percentile, 72.1%, which is a big jump from what they have been frequently doing this season and not attacking the rim and instead settling for 3-point shots. And obviously, the Cavs understand that without Darius Garland, Max Strus, Sam Merrill, they need to find other ways to be successful. And I thought it was especially telling that without Darius Garland, who creates so much as a rim running guard, someone who wants to get to the basket and create from the painted area, that without him, even though the Cavs were still doing that.
Offensively, we've been kind of begging our guys to get to the paint more. I know they didn't have Cornette tonight, but we were downhill. Evan was getting to the rim, and it's kind of the story of the game.
And obviously, I know if Chris was on this podcast, he would talk about how Lonzo Ball attacked the basket and got to the rim, which is something that we've joked about on this podcast has not happened enough this season for someone who has such a great passing acumen. It has felt like Lonzo Ball has been so prioritized in the transition game that you haven't seen his success in the half court when it comes to what he's done with the ball in his hands. Because tonight was his 15th shot in the paint all season long. We're at 24 games into the season. And for somebody who doesn't have the shooting acumen this season, I mean, even tonight, which I thought was a good thing, he was 0 of 1 from three-point land. But he didn't continuously hoist them up even when he started missing, because we've seen in previous contests where he would continue to jack. But Kenny Atkinson mentioned after the game that Lonzo looked like he was playing with more joy in the second half. He looked like he was more like himself. Well, I've talked about it on this podcast a numerous amount of times. I'm okay with not seeing Lonzo Ball take more than 7 shots in a game. And I think that's because he got to get into what he's good at in tonight's ball game. He had a great steal into an assist to Donovan Mitchell that had him going into the crowd a little bit tonight, which I think was emblematic of what he's capable of and how he can impact the game. Obviously finished with 5 assists and 6 rebounds, which is huge. That's the role of what we've talked about for Lonzo Ball. And when he's not hoisting up a lot of shots that are unnecessary, you get to value him more. You get to see how he impacts the game more rather than trying to contemplate why he would take a certain shot. You don't necessarily harp on that. You now get to view him in a different kind of light. And going back to the points in the paint for just a second, I mentioned how they were in the 100th percentile for frequency. You got to see the success as well, because the Cavs ended up winning the points in the paint battle 80-44. That's a drastic difference. It's nearly double when we talk about how De'Aaron Fox was getting into the painted area in the first half and changing that narrative in the second half and dominating themselves. That's what we've talked about on this podcast, about how they've needed to dictate the game rather than adjusting and switching to what the opposing defense or opposing offense is doing. And I think that's important to see how Kenny Atkinson was utilizing that. And one of my favorite moments from tonight's ball game was when Jalen Tyson was leading this bench unit and Donovan Mitchell was getting ready to go check himself back in for Jalen Tyson, who played all 12 minutes of the third quarter. That's a huge testament to his work ethic and his conditioning as well. But for Donovan Mitchell to be walking to the scorer's table, kind of run into Kenny Atkinson as Jalen Tyson took a shot.
Kenny say what he said? And he said, what the hell are you doing to JT before he shot that? It was an outrageous shot. I'm not going to lie, but you made it, so we ain't really tripping. I'm happy for all your success. Don't think I'm hating. So is Kenny. It was just funny because, like, that's just not a shot he shoots in the floor. But, like, that just tells you, where we're at. Like, he's hooping, man. Like, you go out there, you don't stop that. And I was going to sub him out. I mean, no, like, he's doing his thing. He almost shot a sidestep off the right to left cross. That would have been outrageous if you shot that. But no, you can't take him off the floor. Like, that's a testament to him. And I'm really running out of nice things to say because he does it every night.
And Donovan Mitchell just hugged Kenny and laughed hysterically and then walked himself back to the bench, because that's the kind of flow state that Jalen Tyson and that bench unit were in, where they were able to capitalize on some of the mistakes that the San Antonio Spurs were making. But it was just also the defensive acumen and the intensity and the power that they were playing with on that end of the floor that was translating into the offensive end. And you just don't mess with that. And that's kind of what I've been talking about when it comes to minutes on the podcast. It's like Craig Porter Jr. has played good minutes at points, but then been on a shorter leash and doesn't get the opportunity to finish games or all these other things, especially when Darius Garland has struggled this season. So to see Kenny Atkinson stick with that unit and Donovan Mitchell to actively go back to the bench rather than making a change or forcing an action or forcing something different, I think was a big thing for this team. And it's necessary going forward for them to continue to experiment, but to stick with what's working and then plugging in when players need rest. And obviously, as I mentioned, Jalen Tyson playing 12 minutes straight might show you that he doesn't need a break all the time, but he does deserve those rest periods. And we saw that to start the fourth quarter, where he didn't start the period because he needed a breather. And I think that was more than deserved. But also in the point of attacking the paint. And we talk about Evan Mobley and Jared Allen when it comes to this and the success that they were able to have. Evan Mobley tonight finished with 17 points on 7 of 12 shooting. He took 0 3-point attempts, again, showcasing the importance and the emphasis of then getting to the paint. He also had 10 rebounds and 5 assists. There's two big things from this, right? We understand that Evan Mobley is becoming a better hub with the ball in his hands, and that's something that the Cavs have been wanting to see since the beginning of the season, getting him to be a offensive focal point, but also realizing how to make the best play. He was aggressive at times. He was passive at times. He was passing the ball at times. And I think that balance for Evan Mobley is huge in the development of his game, the processing speed of the game. It's feeling like the game is coming to him more naturally. He's finding guys in pockets, finding guys for open shots, and drawing teams in intentionally rather than kind of adjusting and reacting to them doing that, and kind of having to learn a different style of basketball for him because he hadn't seen those types of defenses all year. But he said after the game, when it comes to the points in the paint and attacking the rim and getting those kinds of looks, it's easier for them to do that. And they had their best field goal percentage game this season because they shot 58.1% from the floor. And their last best contest came against Milwaukee in November, where they shot 55.7% from the field. But it was because they got to the basket, and those are easier shots. Obviously, he said it and joked about it and laughed about it afterwards. But if you remember, if you think back to last season where Jared Allen led the league in field goal percentage, the joke that he continuously made is, I continuously get easy looks because I'm at the rim all the time. Now you saw this season, there have been times where he's been given the opportunity to shoot threes. And I think that's not necessarily what the strength of this team has been. Obviously, they've gotten away from that, and we're not trying to make this into a bigger thing than it is, and we're not trying to write off the wrongs of what happened this season because of one contest. But I think it's beneficial for this Cavs team to see what works for them and see that there's still validity in the blueprint that they've created for themselves over the years of a defensive identity, of attacking the rim, of creating from the painted area, and not having to jack up 3-point shots, especially when you don't have necessarily the personnel to do so on any given night. And that's important for how they're going to structure their roster and their lineups and all these things, particularly when you're talking about still being without multiple of these players for an extended period, because we know Larry Nance Jr. is going to be out for a while. And then obviously Max Strus, we don't know necessarily when he's going to make his debut of the season. We're already 24 games in. Last year, it took those 27 games, but we know it's not going to be just 3 more games. And so the Cavs trying to find an identity, trying to find who they can be on any given night with the players that they have available is something that we've talked about on this podcast at length. And I think it's important for them to continue to get into this rhythm, in this flow. And obviously, Dean Wade being an active piece, playing in that third quarter, starting the third quarter over Naquan Tomlin. Kenny Atkinson admitting he probably should have started the game with Dean Wade instead of Naquan Tomlin. I think that's huge. And obviously, the accountability of this team has been great. But Dean Wade actually making shots and taking shots is the next step because they need everybody on this roster to score. Dean Wade being 4 of 6 from the field, 2 of 4 from deep, 50%. We know he has struggled from the 3-point line to start the season, was big, but also 8 rebounds. We know how Kenny Atkinson values him on the boards. 5 assists. There were 4 players tonight with 5 or more assists. That's a huge thing when it comes to the ball movement of the team and how the beautiful game comes back to the Cleveland Cavaliers once they're playing with that mentality and that speed and that vigor when the ball is moving and the defense has to turn its head because it's trying to figure out who is the most dangerous on the floor. And when you're entering that flow state, you understand that every player is feeding off of each other's makes. And that can be so helpful for this team going forward. And I did mention just the overall rebounding battle, but I want to point out this, right? There were also 5 different players who grabbed 6 or more rebounds, and multiple of them were considered guards. Obviously, Craig Porter Jr. grabbing 7 is huge. Jalen Tyson grabbed 6. Lonzo Ball grabbed 6. These are now lineups that Kenny Atkinson can lean on without feeling like they're undersized. And he mentioned Craig Porter Jr. kind of being in that bucket, 6'1", but not playing to that size, playing a little bit bigger, playing a little bit stronger, having the hops clearly to get up and contest with some bigger opponents. And then obviously the blocks are another thing as well. Jalen Tyson had 2 blocks. Craig Porter Jr. didn't have any blocks tonight, but he had 2 steals. The deflections, the length of arms, the instinct, all of these different things are huge for this Cavs team when it comes to the defensive end of the floor, and relying on these different players and having multiple lineups that they can go to that feel like they're defense heavy, but still have scores on the floor, or creating transition points off defense, because that makes their life so much easier on the offensive end as it is. But as I mentioned, the Cavs got to build off of this, right? Multiple players had good games tonight against the Spurs, but it's only going to last for one night. You have to continue this process. It's process over outcome based, right? And next game comes very quickly against the Golden State Warriors on Saturday, a team that is also going to be hampered. And the injury report from the Golden State Warriors reads that Jimmy Butler is questionable, Seth Curry is questionable, Draymond Green is questionable, DeAnthony Melton is questionable, and then you have Al Horford is out, Stephen Curry is also out. So we understand that there is going to be a set game plan for this Cavs team, especially without a true center if Draymond Green is unable to play, that they're going to have to go back into this mindset of attacking the rim, seeing what Evan Mobley can do, allowing him to make the correct play, but also play with aggression. There were multiple times tonight where he tried to put players in the rim, and that grows his confidence on a nightly basis if you're able to even get close to those things and try and assert yourself and dominate the contest. That makes other defenses worry about you more if you're going to be that aggressive with the ball in your hands, and that creates more opportunities for those around you. So I want to keep seeing Evan Mobley play with this vigor, with this excitement, with this hype when it comes to how he's attacking the basket. And even if it doesn't necessarily lean into a 20-point performance, it's going to create more opportunities for everybody else around him and make the game so much easier for him. So I'm excited to see what he's going to be able to do against the Golden State Warriors, especially as they're so hampered. And obviously with Cleveland Cavaliers, I would assume that they'll be without at least 3. Obviously, Lonzo Ball is not going to play in the second night of a back-to-back. Max Strus is going to be out. Jared Allen, Larry Nance Jr., Darius Garland will likely be back. Tyrese Proctor is a wild card because he was out for personal reasons. So it's going to be interesting to see the lineups that Kenny Atkinson constructs. But I think the biggest thing that I want to come back to and circle back as my last point on today's podcast is this Cavs team and Kenny Atkinson needs to continue to lean on what is working on any given contest, whether that's Craig Porter Jr., Jalen Tyson, Naquan Tomlin, or one of the stars and starters. If it's Evan Mobley, Donovan Mitchell, or Darius Garland, whoever, they need to be able to lean on these guys and trust them and change the rotations and the lineups, if necessary, around them to make sure that they're on the court when they're in this flow state, when they're having success, and allowing them to continue that set and be in that frame of mind rather than having to pull them out to match up with the rotation or match up with a certain time log. Unless they're on a minute restriction, which I don't know if there's going to be anyone in that bucket for tomorrow's game for the Cavs, but understanding that some players, if they come out, they're going to go back and resort to being cold rather than being in that hot state that they're in. Jalen Tyson obviously played for 12 minutes in that third quarter, like I mentioned. That's a testament to Kenny Atkinson and to Jalen Tyson for doing that work. Craig Porter Jr. played 24 minutes tonight. He played more minutes than DeAndre Hunter. He played more minutes than Naquan Tomlin, Thomas Bryant, guys that have more size than him, but he was able to showcase that wasn't going to debilitate the Cavs by being a smaller lineup. Obviously, having Lonzo Ball, 6'6", out there alongside him is helpful. And I really like that lineup, and I've said that a couple of times on this podcast. Lonzo Ball next to Darius Garland or Craig Porter Jr. someone who can get into the painted area if Lonzo Ball is not going to do that as much at this point in his career. I think you have then a transition offense generator and a half-court offense creator when it comes to that lineup, that two-man group. And I want to see more of it. And I don't want to see as much stress put on one or the other of the players to be something that they're not necessarily comfortable with. But I think the matchups and the lineups and the rotations need to be flexible. And I think that's what the depth this roster does for the Cleveland Cavaliers. And Kenny Atkinson has to lean into that to allow this Cavs team to play to its fullest potential, because this is a team that relies on its depth, is going to rely on its depth when it comes to the playoffs. And again, he mentioned Naquan Tomlin being a playoff contributor, how Jalen Tyson is going to contribute in the playoffs as well. And I think that's an interesting topic for how this Cavs team is going to go forward when it becomes healthy, if it becomes healthy. And that's something that this Cavs team cannot rely on, and it has to continue to build the trust and the comfortability of these players who have not necessarily gotten heavy minutes, but now figuring out how they're going to fit in if the Cavs cannot get healthy, and what that looks in a playoff run, especially against teams like the San Antonio Spurs, who even without Victor Wembanyama and Stephon Castle have challenged teams like the Orlando Magic and such. So I do think this was a good win for the Cavs. It's probably one of their better wins of the season. They're 14-10. As Jalen Tyson said after the game, this doesn't fix everything, but it's taking a step in the right direction. Now they have to follow it up again against the Golden State Warriors on Saturday night at Rocket Arena. Tip-off at 7:30. I think it's going to be a good one, even though both teams are going to be hampered. It's still a learning experience for the Cavs. And for this team particularly, it's a process-based thing. And this is going to allow them to continue to build data on who they want to be, on who they can be when it comes to the playoff scenarios. But with all that being said, that'll wrap up today's episode of the Wine and Gold Talk podcast. But remember to become a Cavs insider and interact with Chris, me, and Jimmy by subscribing to Subtext. Sign up for a 14-day free trial or visit cleveland.com/Cavs and click on the blue bar at the top of the page. If you don't like it, that's fine. All you have to do is text the word STOP. It's easy, but we can tell you that the people who sign up stick around, because this is the best way to get insider coverage on the Cavs from me, Chris, and Jimmy. This isn't just our podcast. It's your podcast. And the only way to have your voice heard is through Subtext. Y'all be safe. We out.